we're going to try and do a lighter topic here. I don't know.
It's not that light either, but it's a little bit less
more
heavy.
Domestic, less politically charged. So let's put this up there on the screen. We finally got the actual results of the new census data, and it is really stunning. And look, if I think you hold the position that Krystal and I have, that what's happening right now in America probably is not a good thing, then you are seeing the real partisan effects of basically we have a split nation. We have half the country which is growing. We have half the country which is getting smaller. And you can see the partisan implications of that in that graphic, which is up there, which is that the fastest growing counties have exclusively gotten more Democratic since 2012. Counties shifting towards Republicans have shrunk. Of the counties that grew, 70% shifted Democrat, 90% of shrinkers moved right. Now, before you pull a Hillary Clinton and say, I won all of the places which are growing, Nate Cohn actually has a pretty good point. Let's put the next tweet up there on the screen, which is that, look, for all of the demographics or destiny takes of the last 10 years, all the favorable quote-unquote demographic trends, Democrats are not stronger than they were in the beginning of the decade. And I think what it comes down to is that we see here a nation which is bifurcating, which is that the industrial Midwest and many other places across the country are having the economic life out of them getting sucked dry, and all of it is being concentrated in different areas where permanent capital and more are very comfortable. And you are seeing that the people who have connections to that land, connections to their community, who don't maybe want to leave where they're from, are left behind for increasingly nothing. One of the worst takes that I've seen on this, Michael Moore, our old friend, was celebrating the fact that, there's less white people in the Midwest. Yeah, you know why? They're dead from opioid abuse. It's like, what is wrong with you?
That's
what I have
weird
seen,
thing to celebrate.
Yeah, it's the worst thing I've seen. I mean, look, I don't care necessarily about the demographic makeup. More what I'm talking about is let's look at this data and we can see the fact that we are losing a lot of people to opioid abuse, to economic complete destruction of their neighborhoods and livelihoods and more. And this is a very stark picture, I think, of the country. I saw a lot of triumphalism on it, but that is not how I see the data whatsoever.
Well, and so in terms of if you want to look through this through like a partisan lens, there was news in there that Democrats considered to be good. The country is getting more urban, it's getting more suburban, it's getting more diverse, more black and brown. And also some of the, conservative takes about like, oh, this is the end of New York City. Well, New York City was one of the fastest growing
apparently it grew.
large cities in the country. So that was completely absurd. But I think Nate Cohn's take here, and it's not just a take, I mean, it's just a fact, is really interesting and really important to realize. Everything basically demographically went Democrats' way over this past decade.
That's right.
And yet they've made no progress. Why? It's not hard to figure out. It's because they've lost more of the white working class. And maybe that's been a sort of realignment that's been happening over years and years, as the white working class tends to be more culturally conservative. And as politics have become more and more about the culture war and not actually delivering for people's material well-being, well, that kind of made sense that they would sort out to the Republican Party, ultimately with Donald Trump really driving that change. The other part that Democrats really don't want to talk about very much is that the other piece of why they haven't been able to make up any ground and improve their situation nationally is because Latinos have moved increasingly over the Republican side. Now, Democrats still overwhelmingly win Latino demographic, but working class Latino men in particular have moved towards the Republican Party. So, look, I think if you're the Democratic Party, you should feel a lot of shame at the fact that the places that are struggling, the people who are struggling the most, they don't see anything in your party for themselves. I mean, those are the places that the Democratic Party is supposed to be the party of the downtrodden, supposed to be the party of the working class, the party of the people. And yet the places that are struggling the most have moved the most rapidly to the right. Now, you should be doing some soul searching about that. Of course, we haven't seen any sign that that's actually what they're going to do here. So it's a pretty revealing moment. Now, look, in terms of the big reason the census matters in political terms is because redistricting is about to happen. And so the way that the lines are going to be drawn, the way that the gerrymandering is ultimately going to happen is impacted greatly by what the census says, because you have to have the districts be roughly equivalent in size. So the fact that this went a little bit better for Democrats than they were expecting is going to make it a bit harder for Republicans who control more of the the machinery of redistricting than Democrats do. It's going to make it a little bit harder for them to gerrymander. But Democrats are not in a great position here, even with everything going their way over the past decade. And the last thing I'll say about this, though, is a hopeful thing, which is like, we sort of have this idea that everybody's hardened in their political beliefs and political persuasion and their party identity, et cetera. Well, one lesson over the past 10 years, that's not the case.
Not the case at all.
Because if that was the case, then Democrats would be doing a lot better than they are right now.
Hillary would be president. This would be like her second term, if that was true.
People can move between parties. They can change their minds. They can be persuaded. So you might want to actually try. That would be a sort of new approach for the parties to actually try and persuade people ultimately here. One last note that I thought was interesting is a lot of the growth in the Latino population, it's no longer from incoming immigrants. It's from people who are, whose parents
American citizens
are here and they are born here and they're American citizens.
Yeah.
So when you see that Latino population growth, that is by and large coming from people who are here and who are citizens and having babies and having families and are as American as anyone else.
It's pretty fascinating also if you look at the county by county data. So Dave Wasserman actually has this up there on the fastest 10 growing counties from 2010 to 2020. Every single one of them is Texas and Florida with the exception of Forsyth, Georgia. I hope I said that right. So Hays, Texas was the top, Comal, Texas, 49%, Ocella, Florida, Williamson, Texas, St. John's, Florida, Forsyth, Georgia, Kaufman, Texas, Fort Bend, Texas, Sumter, Florida, and Rockwall, Texas. So Texas and Florida just seeing explosive growth in the last 10 years. But to what I was saying earlier, look at what the 10 counties with the fastest shrinking counties. Let's throw this next one up there. Well, number 1, Robinson, North Carolina. Number 2, Hinds, Mississippi. Number 3, Cambria, Pennsylvania. 4, Caddo, Louisiana. 5, San Juan, New Mexico. 6, Kanawha, West Virginia. 7, Macon, Illinois. 8, Fayette, Pennsylvania. 9, Baltimore City, Maryland. 10, St. Louis City, Missouri. So what do you see there? Industrial Midwest, Inner Midwest, and more. They are the fastest shrinking counties in the United States. These are the more left behind places, and all of them became a lot more Republican in the last 10 years. All the ones at the top became a lot more Democrat. Even though they are in Texas and Florida, they're that new, kind of suburban type. So the suburbanization of America continues. It is certainly going blue, but that doesn't mean that, a lot of the left behind people are not going to vote or are not going to change in the way that they traditionally view the country. So really in the data, all I see is the country continues to split apart almost entirely by economic lines, and where you live has become a much more a much bigger indicator than ever before of how you vote. I think I did a whole monologue on Rising about there was all the spatial analysis data where if you live around people where 2/3 don't have a college degree, you're most likely going to vote Trump. And if you live in places with 2/3 of a college degree, you're mostly likely to vote for Biden. Same things in terms of dollars. And actually really holds regardless of race, except whenever it comes to the black community. So all of that just shows me that we are increasingly splitting apart. You're seeing increasing concentration in the areas that are doing well, vast shrinking, in the places that aren't doing well. But you can't leave those people behind and just write them off like that famous Hillary quote of "I won all the places which were growing."
As if that's
not a good thing. Yeah,
you're supposed to be the ones who are representing the people who are left, but you're supposed to be speaking up for the powerless. And so, like I said, you would think there would be some soul searching going on, but there's clearly not. And it's what Democrats do is once they lose a place like Iowa or they lose a place like Ohio, they just forget about it. They're like, let's move on to Georgia. Let's move on to Arizona. Let's move over to greener pastures where there is more, economic dynamism and people doing a little bit better. Maybe we'll do better in those places. One of the results that came out of here is Georgia may already be majority minority.
Yes.
It's basically 50-50 right now. And so The new battlegrounds are what you would expect them to be. They are Georgia, it is Arizona, those Sunbelt states, and it is also, I mean, eventually Texas is probably going to come into play, although again, demographics aren't destiny. So the fact that you have increasing browning of some of these places does not mean the Democrats are ultimately going to have a lock on any of them, or even, you know, a realistic chance at any of them. They got to do a lot better.
I would not bet on this forever. I think really what it shows is, to your point, that people are up for grabs if you're willing to talk to them.
Yeah.
You know, if you abandon the cultural concerns of millions of people, they'll go elsewhere. And same thing whenever it comes on the Republican side. If you abandon the economic, you know, or the economic tastes and more of millions of people, they'll also go elsewhere. So that's what's happening.
It's weird right now. You're kind of watching in real time the Republicans just go back to all the crap that they used to say. I mean, it's just like
neocons in Afghanistan.
Yeah, now suddenly everybody on the Republican side is a total neocon again. Anything different that they said in the Trump years, they were clearly just like pretending. I mean, obviously, they did not actually believe the words they were saying if they said anything in favor of getting out of Afghanistan during those years. And on economics, it's the same thing. It's kind of what I'm tackling in my monologue. Like any divergence from traditional Republican, Reaganite orthodoxy on economics is also completely out the window. So it is interesting to see in real time, and we'll watch what the political ramifications of that are. The last thing I'll say on your point regarding people being persuadable is I think that the Trump campaign and the Republicans proved this. They actually invested a lot of money in flipping Latinos and turning out more Latinos to vote for them. And they saw that in Florida, but it wasn't just in Florida. A lot of people want to make this just about Cubans. This was an across-the-board phenomenon.
Texas as well.
And Texas, you know, maybe even more so than Florida, but this was pretty consistent trend across the country. No mystery why. They actually invested in talking to those communities, and it had an impact. And I would say the Sanders campaign also proved that point in the Latino community, where they also spent a lot of money and took a lot of time and actually invested in talking to those communities and pitching Bernie Sanders' platform to them. So people are movable. Don't give up on making the case by actually delivering for the American people. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.